The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 601 Alpha Male. Lex smiled politely at the mother, while doing his best to resist cursing her. It was extremely important to get along with her because her family was the main target for the existing quest. He also had to keep in mind that while he had to make this wedding as exquisite as possible, he had to cater to the family's wishes and requirements as well. To do all that, he had to maintain a cordial relationship with them, so he had to put up with the unnecessarily eager mother. "My name is Lex. It's a pleasure to meet you." No, the pleasure is all mine. "My name is Jolene, but everyone just calls me Mom." Before the conversation progressed any further, Fardy had finally recovered from the tackle he received from Jasmine and spoke up. Hey, this is moving way too fast. I didn't agree to any of this. Don't think I'm a man who can be forced into things." Although Fardy usually played a very casual and carefree character, Lex had to admit that it took a certain level of conviction and determination to reject such a marriage, even at the risk of personal consequences. If his personality was really of the lovable town idiot, he would not have been able to bear such a burden. Lex had genuine respect for that aspect of him. Unfortunately, Lex was invested in this wedding now, so. "Allow me to have a word with him," Lex said with a smile before anyone else could speak up. Using the spatial manipulation formation, he formed a separate room, containing only Fardy and him. This way no one would be able to hear them speak. Lex also surrounded themselves with dark imperial shields, blocking their sight to prevent lip reading. "The situation does not seem to be in your favor," Lex said, a trace of sympathy in his voice. "Tell me what you want, I'll try to help you get it." "I want to be free from that girl," Fardy said, his voice extremely forceful yet somehow lacking conviction. "I mean, didn't you hear her? She played with my entire life on a whim when I was being kind to her. If I stay with her, she'll play with my entire life as if it were a game." Lex nodded, as he could clearly understand what Fardy was saying, but didn't immediately respond. Instead, after a short pause, he asked, "Tell me, Fardy, what do you envision your future as?" The young noble was taken aback by the sudden question, but did not hesitate to answer. "I may not have the financial support of my family anymore, but they can't take my knowledge away from me. I have the understanding and the techniques required to raise my cultivation further. I'll grow strong, and eventually start my own family. Maybe I'll even take control of a small region somewhere." "An admirable goal," Lex commented, genuine praise in his voice. "But now, I want you to imagine the scenario for a moment. Let's imagine that you've managed to dissuade Jasmine's family, and have once again rejected the wedding. You did this so that they don't interfere with your life, or in your own words, play with your life anymore. Do you really think they will just let you be after that? Or let you grow strong? Or establish your own power?" Fardy frowned. This was not the first time he had thought of this concern. Truth be told, he had only formed a tentative plan of relying on the Midnight Inn for refuge if things got too troublesome. But the fact that the inn was too expensive to rely on indefinitely without any real income was a major issue. "I don't want to force you into something you don't want," Lex continued upon seeing that Fardy was not replying. "However, I will give you a suggestion. Just think about it and consider for yourself what is best. Regardless of whether you get married or not, the interference of Jasmine and her family in your life will not be over. If you do get married to her, and you happen to re-enter your Noel family, then she will be forced to join your family, instead of you hers. Then you will have a lot more control over the situation. Moreover, with the power and resources of both families available to you, you will be able to go much farther than you can go by yourself." Lex paused for a moment to let Fardy absorb all this information, and contemplate for himself what was the right course of action. Just because Lex had presented the information did not mean he believed that Fardy would follow it blindly. He had to let him reach the conclusion on his own. In fact, Lex planned to divert Fardy's attention by adding another layer of complexity to the situation. It burdened Lex's innocent heart with immense guilt to do this, but it was for Fardy's own good, and was not at all hitting two birds with one stone, I think you should take a look at. If I'm being perfectly honest, although I genuinely think this is the best course of action for you, I also have a bit of an agenda in persuading you towards this marriage. Farty narrowed his eyes and looked at Lex. Although he had not mentioned it, he of course noticed that Lex had taken a side for the marriage instead of helping him. The reason I'm telling you this, Lex lied in a very modest tone of voice, is because without your help, even if I push this wedding forward, I won't really gain anything. That's why I'm being upfront with you as well. If we can come to an understanding, we can move forward with the situation, making sure to benefit the both of us. If not, then I can help you avoid the family's pressure, and you can figure out a way you think is more suitable to handle this situation. What exactly do you need? Farty asked suspiciously. I need information. Extremely sensitive information. I want to know why the human royal family, as well as the other races, aren't fully resisting the Craven invasions. There are secrets related to the Craven that only a very few know, and I want to find out what it is. Even Aegis, the Crown Prince of Hum, did not have this information, though that was mostly a result of his own lazy attitude. I believe that Jasmine's family will have some records or details about the truth. If you can join their family and become an important member, then you can help me get that information. In exchange, I can use some resources from the tavern and the inn to help you increase your importance to the families. That way, you solidify your position and gain the support you need, and I get the information that I want. While Lex was not lying about wanting information about the Craven, that was not his priority at the moment. He was just using one truth to hide another, that he really wanted Farty to agree to the wedding. Jasmine's family is a vassal force of the Cornelius family, so they definitely have an important position in the empire, Farty confirmed. After spending a few moments to consider, he decided that what Lex said was the truth. If that was the case, then he could rely on Lex to help him. After all, nothing was more reliable than a relationship of mutual benefits. Fine, what you say makes sense. But you have to help me negotiate with them and make sure they agree to my conditions before the wedding takes place. Jasmine has to join my family instead of me joining hers. Otherwise, I'll never be anything more than a puppet, and I cannot accept such a thing. It's only fair, Lex agreed with him shamelessly, and shook his hands. Once they had reached a resolution, Lex dismissed his shields and dispersed the separate room. I have excellent news, Lex announced with a massive smile after a brief conversation. Farty has realized that he indeed desires this union. Lex looked towards Jasmine, and continued. Naturally, as a prime dominant alpha male specimen, he has to ensure that Jasmine can match his caliber. Ensuring that Farty's demands would be met would require Jasmine's support, and since Jasmine was such a fan of how manly Farty was, that was the only card he had to play to convince her. He was cringing internally as he spoke, yet his words seemed to resonate with Jasmine. No one had dared make demands of her family in such an upfront manner before, and it excited her even more. Farty truly was the man of her dreams. Suddenly the look in her eyes became feral, and she once again pounced on Farty, but this time her brothers responded in time and caught her beforehand. Lex, why don't you and I speak privately for a moment as well? Jolene asked, winking at him. Chapter 602 Developments. The situation on Earth had taken a turn for the worst. The casualties were catastrophic during the first few weeks of fighting, but had recently started to decrease. The prime cause of the decrease was not that the fighting had diminished. No, far from it in fact. The level of fighting had increased drastically. The real reason for the drop in casualties was that of the remaining population, over 90% over the ages of 15 had become cultivators in some capacity. Most had become followers of Amana and Adamus, with men usually leaning towards Amana and women leaning towards Adamus. Although that alone did not raise their cultivation levels through the roof, it raised their survivability. The second thing that raised the survivability of the humans was the appearance of a few devils and a whole lot of demons. No one knew how they arrived on Earth, probably in a similar fashion to the deities, but they strongly supported the factions led by the old powers of Earth, namely Richard, Sam and Fate the Fatty. Brandon and Elizabeth were the only ones who had not participated in this coalition. Due to their long history and sudden increase in power, a large chunk of the surviving humans flocked to them as well. The deities also did not object to the devils, so that made it extremely convenient, although when news spread, the Jotun Empire strongly condemned this action. A strange power shift was occurring on Earth these days, with the battle being slowly limited to a few regions on Earth, and sometimes in space. The greatest change was the fact that the new powers, the deities and the devils, both restricted the use of golden keys to escape Earth. The act of running away not only weakened Earth, it reduced morale, at least according to them. As such, fewer and fewer people were running away from Earth these days, instead choosing to stand and fight. The situation seemed to have reached an equilibrium of sorts, despite the fact that the fighting never stopped. Amidst all of this, there was one tiny power that had somehow survived, untouched both by devils and deities. The Kingdom of New York, under the rule and protection of King Marlowe, its armies led by genius General Raphael, heir to the kingdom, managed to protect its sovereignty using only its own forces. There were also rumors of a special elite unit consisting of a samurai, a man of metal impervious to all damage, and the final, mysterious member known only as the Dark Invader, who seemed to have control over the darkness. This elite unit had no name, since officially their existence had not been announced, but those who whispered of their strength had started calling them the Powered Rangers. On a battlefield near Niagara Falls, Larry was moving from one robot corpse to another. Although most of the initial invading force of these robot aliens had bodies made of organic matter and were varied, the ones who had been coming most recently had started to show signs of mass production and had more of a uniform structure. That also meant more common materials were used in their manufacturing, though common here was only a relative term. Only an approximate 15% of their bodies were made up of metals, but that was more than enough for Larry. He would not let a single scrap of this metal pass him by, as these metals could not be found on Earth. Moreover, they were excellent conductors for spiritual energy, and were thus excellent fuel for him to raise his cultivation realm. I think you should take a look at. His eyes were completely focused as he performed his tasks, but hidden deep behind them was an unwavering conviction. Jeffrey had thought he was condemning Larry by having the planet invaded by aliens. Instead, he had provided him with excellent resources to power up, and once Larry was strong, he would get his revenge. "Lex, why don't you and I speak privately for a moment as well?" Jolene asked, winking at him. Lex had already steeled himself by now, so he did not have a strong reaction to her antics. He was, however, somewhat surprised at her relentless pursuit, even though she was supposedly facing someone so dangerous. Even her sons, who were much stronger than her, acted with an air of caution while she completely maintained her role as a mama, looking for a husband for her daughter. "Why not?" Lex said, as he erected imperial shields around them and locked them in a separate space, much in the way he had done with Farty. Though he had no intentions of falling for her antics, he had to admire her commitment to the cause. "I love my children, but sometimes it's good to just talk between adults, don't you think?" she asked with a warm smile, as if she were addressing an old friend. "It is easier to talk to someone with a level head," Lex answered, completely ignoring the fact that despite being called an adult among children, he was actually the youngest in the room. "Before we get into the thick of things, shall we properly introduce ourselves? Everything has happened a little abruptly. I was not prepared to run into such a distinguished establishment out here. Of course, it is naturally for the best. After all, if you intend to hold your daughter's wedding in my humble establishment, then you must understand the place well. My name is Lex, as you already know, and this is the Midnight Tavern. There's not much to tell, really. I enjoy the company of people, and bringing happiness and joy to all, so I opened up this little place where guests can come and unwind. Drinks flow freely, and though my selection is a little more limited for more distinguished guests, I do have something in the cellar that can be brought out for such a wonderful occasion. Although the Noel family has been very gracious to me, and even the Crown Prince of Hum Nation is a good friend of mine, I prefer the simple life and tend to stay away from unnecessary politics and strife. So long as no one comes and bothers me, or my guests, I will not bother anyone in return. Chapter 603 Relentless. Jolene maintained her smiling appearance while Lex spoke, and did not show any changes, keeping her thoughts hidden. Naturally, such a thing was completely ineffective against Lex. Not only did he have his sixth sense giving him feedback, his intuition was also providing him with a sense of what she was feeling. Moreover, after confirming with his intuition that it was safe, he conducted a little experiment with his soul sense. He used it to observe any fluctuations in Jolene's soul. Lex could not observe in too much detail, as she would likely sense something amiss even without a soul sense of her own, but it was enough to simply observe from afar. Although her thoughts did not cause any prominent changes to her soul, Lex could clearly determine that she was in an excited yet tense state. Basically, she knew she had stumbled across an opportunity, but also knew that she had to be cautious to make use of it. After noticing that Lex did not respond to any of her previous hints and suggestions, she decided to make one final attempt. If that did not work, she would employ less direct, and more long-term measures. If there was one thing she was adept at, it was finding spouses for her children. Considering that noble and powerful families existed for thousands upon thousands of years, they naturally had many children. As such, many noble families had their children marry one another. Obviously, not all noble families had an equal status or power, but it was impossible to expect that each child would marry into an equally powerful, or even more powerful family. That was one of the reasons the Noel family had an opportunity to connect to theirs in the first place, besides the obvious developing business connections. Now that she had encountered a new independent and potentially untapped power, there was no way she wouldn't try to secure the connection for one of her children. The fact that he had a friendship with the genius crown prince only added more legitimacy to his establishment. I envy your freedom. Between managing my husband's estate, and all the numerous political appearances I have to make, I barely get time to attend my own children's weddings. My husband is Laurent Phillips, Duke of the Phillips Province, home to one of the few Ethereum mines in all of the Crystal Realm. The fact that King Cornelius let our family maintain operations of the mine, instead of controlling it themselves, speaks of the close bond and trust we share with the royal family. Lex was, naturally, familiar with Ethereum, though it had to be admitted that the only reason he remembered it was because of his improved memory and intelligence. He had taken a list of all the commonly sold valuable items at the Infinity Emporium, as well as their uses. Ethereum was listed there, with its description stating that it was an incredibly valuable or used in the manufacturing of machines, gear, and weapons suited for immortals. Ethereum mining was one of the profitable businesses in the entire Origin realm, so much so that intergalactic wars had been fought over especially large mines. If what Jolene said was true, then they truly were very closely associated with the royal family. That posed both an opportunity and a risk for Lex. He wanted to avoid the king and his attention, but the close relation meant that the Phillips family probably had all the valuable information he needed. I'm sure their trust is well placed. It is an honor for me to host you at my humble establishment. I think you should take a look at. Not humble at all, she rebuked, waving her hand. Don't think I will let appearances fool me. Although you've styled your place to seem nondescript, I can immediately identify Dribble Oakwood. Even my husband would not complain while staying here. The Dribble Oakwood she was talking about came from a round of upgrades the tavern underwent when the Midnight Inn underwent the star rank increase. Since the star ranking of the tavern couldn't be increased, since it was not in a separate realm, the entire tavern building and its entire structure was upgraded. The Dribble Oakwood was a special kind of wood that was especially sturdy, and generally was considered indestructible. That was because the more physical force that was applied to it, the stronger it became. Cutting the tree required immortals using their personal strength and vast amounts of spirit energy. Other than being sturdy, it also cleaned the air of impurities, gave off a fresh smell, and would generally attract spiritual energy around itself. Lex only smiled at her comment but said nothing else. Now that we have been properly introduced, Jolene began, let's talk about the issue at hand. Although it was not my wish, it is clear that Jasmine has taken a great liking to young Farty. It seems inevitable that they will get married, regardless of what anyone says. Indeed, that seems to be the case, Lex said while nodding. Though I don't see why you wish to discuss that with me. I am only here to provide services should anyone need them. I do not interfere in my guests' business, at least unless they are about to harm my tavern or my guests. Lex did not even flinch as he lied shamelessly. Indeed, I do not wish for you to interfere in this matter, nor would I want someone else to handle my business. No, what I wish to talk about is the potential political repercussions that we'll have to face as a result of this. I was hoping to have your cooperation so that we can mitigate any potential fallout, and keep the event going as smoothly as possible. After all, not everyone will want to see this union take place. Anything can happen at any time. As such, I'll be assigning one of my most competent daughters to work with you, so that she can coordinate on my behalf as events unfold. Naturally, with all my duties, I cannot be here all the time, so she will take care of that for me. Chapter 604 Repulsive. Lex could already determine what Jolene was trying to do. This was probably a relatively common custom amongst nobles and powerful cultivators, where he would spend time with Jolene's daughter to determine if he liked her or not. Lex had no doubt that she would be a wonderful woman, but he had other concerns. Romance was the last on the list of things he was concerned about. I look forward to working with her, Lex commented. Just so that I know, when are you expecting this wedding to take place? Since you have already contacted your family and told them to arrive, shall I expect the wedding to take place as soon as they arrive? Of course, whatever your thoughts, I'm sure Pfardy and his family will also have some considerations. My daughter, no doubt, is in a great rush to get married. As much as I would like to indulge her, these things can never be quick or simple. Were these ordinary circumstances, an engagement period of even 10 years would not be unusual. As it happens, due to the various complications that have resulted due to the very public rejection and then reunion, the process will be sped up as much as possible. Various important guests will be invited and some backdoor negotiations will take place. Even at the earliest, it will take a couple of months. Lex did not show any reaction, yet he was internally disappointed. Waiting a couple of months, at the very least, was already too long. He could not afford to sit here and wait while this happened, but at the same time, he more or less expected as such. The only real option he had was to begin his journey, heading towards either Valesco, to meet the Crystal Race Elder, or anywhere else he could expect to find some answers. In the meantime, he could use his remote presence ability to coordinate with Pfardy, Jolene, her daughter, or whoever else. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Lex asked. Although talking privately made things more convenient, nothing they talked about really required a separated conversation. So that meant that whatever Jolene really wanted to talk about was still left. Actually, the matter I wanted to talk about is unrelated to the wedding. Your tavern, due to its deceivingly humble appearance, has provided a remarkably opportune location to facilitate certain tasks that I would rather confidential. I'm glad you find my establishment to be of use. How can I help? It is nothing too complicated. Over the next few days, someone will come by and drop a package with you. Afterwards, at some point, I will come over and pick it up. Holding on to the package is not the issue. The issue is that the package's container will not be able to restrict its aura for very long. If someone detects the aura of the items contained within the package, it would be quite problematic. As such, the package needs to be placed in a completely isolated and enclosed environment. Naturally, when I come by, I will replace the packaging and take it away. That is not an issue at all, Lex confirmed. All the person needs to do is rent a room for the duration he wishes to keep the package hidden. I'll place the package in the room, and no one will come out or go in. I'll even place protections around the room to ensure none of the aura is leaked. Jolene nodded, but she wasn't completely satisfied. This exchange means a lot to me, so I can't just go ahead with it without testing it out first. I'll pass along a sample to you that will behave similarly to the package I'm expecting. If you're able to block its aura for 3 days, then I will proceed with the deal. It's not a problem, Lex commented simply. Jolene activated her spatial ring and summoned a small, palm-sized black box, with no obvious. For now, the box appeared to be completely normal, but if what Jolene said was true, then soon it would begin to leak out a very noticeable aura. Lex reached forward and grabbed it, but while his spirit and soul sense could not detect anything from the box, the moment he touched it a grotesque and repulsive feeling filled him. The feeling was so potent that, even with all the practice he had maintaining his expression, he could not help but reveal a frown. The feeling was coming from his intuition, and it was telling him clearly that whatever was in the box was absolutely putrid. Lex brought his gaze up to Jolene, who seemed startled at his frown, but said nothing. After a moment, Lex put the box away in his own spatial bangled, I think you should take a look at. In 3 days, I'll come to collect the box from you, she said sheepishly. Lex only nodded, and without confirming the conclusion of their conversation, removed the shields surrounding them. They were once again reunited with the group, but instead of continuing the conversation with the group, Lex stood up. There's much left to discuss, but matters have happened fairly abruptly. How about an intermission to collect ourselves and our thoughts on the matter? After all parties involved have had a chance to discuss amongst themselves, you can reconvene to continue planning. Farty was not expecting such a sudden break from the meeting, but despite the private meeting Lex had with Jolene, he was sure that Lex was on his side. In that case, going along with the plan would only help him and not harm him. Jasmine was the most reluctant, but her mother's stern grip on her hand ensured that she did not misbehave. As it happened, Fenrir showed up once again and, forlornly, handed the necklace back to Jasmine. Although the pup had wanted to keep it for himself, Lex had used their connection to get the pup to return it. Jolene, Jasmine and the rest departed, leaving Lex and Farty behind. He did not plan on leaving, since the Phillips family was probably heading towards the Noel family mansion anyway. Instead, he used a communication talisman to send a message to his brother with a brief summary of what happened, and waited for them to contact him first. Is everything all right? Farty asked, sensing something off about Lex. Although he did not ask directly, even he could sense that Lex was unsettled after the private meeting with Jolene. A small matter, unrelated to you, so no need for you to worry. I have a few tasks to take care of, so if you need me just leave a message at the bar. Farty only nodded and went back to the main hall where the flutist and dancer were finally taking a break. Jolene had already paid for a room for 3 days, but instead of going to one of the usual rooms, Lex went to the hidden rooms underneath the bar. There, he placed the repulsive black box in the middle of a room. Originally Lex was planning on just blocking the room off using the spatial formation, but suddenly he decided that he needed to take more precautions. He summoned some of the Orion scale he had stocked up at the inn and encased the box in them, before locking the space around them. That should be enough to hold off whatever aura the box was supposed to release. A part of Lex was extremely curious about what the box held. He had never felt something so repulsive, and he wanted no part in whatever business it involved. But technically speaking, Jolene was not breaking any of the rules for his tavern. He was bound to run into more situations in the future where he encountered unsavory things. He needed to decide how he would deal with them. For now, he was maintaining his neutrality, but if it began to wear on his consciousness, he may try something else. With that done, Lex left the tavern. Although he planned on doing his best for this wedding, that did not involve wasting his time. Since he could manage the wedding using his remote presence, there was no point in sticking around. His first destination was the sea. His instincts had told him that there was something valuable under the water. Although going deep underwater was extremely dangerous, for it was always dark and served as the breeding ground or endless monster, if the sea's dangers made them completely untraversable, then there wouldn't be so much trade happening. Although he made no special preparations to keep his presence hidden, almost no one paid much attention to him as he made his way to the port. It was an extremely high-traffic area, so there was no reason to find his behavior suspicious. Moreover, he walked so calmly and confidently that no one felt he was out of place. Even as he walked up to the water and suddenly jumped off the pier, no one noticed. Chapter 605 Under the Sea. In a cold, gray stone room, a single lamp produced a dim blue light. The light was barely enough to see, but more than enough to produce long, dark shadows that spread to the distant walls. On a throne similarly made of stone sat a repulsive slug-like creature, known as a gelati. It looked weak and tired, yet the aura it radiated was overbearing. Only those gray stone slabs could support the pressure, and the lamp, of course, though barely. In front of the gelati, some distance away, stood a devil in its non-human form. It was 10 feet tall, with a body seemingly made of black rocks, with veins of magma pulsing between them. There were 2 curved horns on its head, and hovering in the air, between those horns, was a rock emitting a beautiful scarlet glow. "It has come to my lord's attention that you have had some problems with the Midnight Inn," the devil said, his voice grating to hear. The gelati released an angry garbling noise, and its aura exploded, but then it calmed itself down, though barely. "Yes," it hissed. "My slave. My slave. They are keeping my slave from me. During its final reincarnation, my precious dreamy fox somehow escaped, and was reincarnated somewhere else. But I have its soul signature recorded. How can I not recognize it? I need it back before it matures. A dreamy fox on the verge of its final evolution is the most important ingredient in the pill I'm refining. Without it, I will not be able to survive the tribulation that will occur when I enter the next realm. I have delayed my breakthrough long enough. My lord too wishes to acquire something from within the Midnight Inn. He is inviting you to join him. The only chance we have of success is if we pool our strengths. Are you not afraid of the Dailard?" the gelati hissed again, angrily. "My lord, Rockefeller's father too, is a Dowlord. As you know, we devils have no shortage of Dowlords. We fear no one." This time, the gelati did not hiss. Instead, after spending some time contemplating, its body lifted into the air, and it approached the devil. The sea water was pleasantly cold, though the water near the pier was somewhat grimy. It was not too deep either, as Lex could clearly see the surface when he reached the bottom. Of course, it also helped that this near Babylon, the seabed was embedded with numerous rods, emitting a soft red light. In fact, these rods were spread on the seabed for a few miles around the town, to ensure no new monsters were spawned there. The town's navy would inspect them almost weekly, alongside having numerous hunting expeditions where they cleared the nearby waters of any monsters. Lex practiced moving his arms to see how the water pressure affected him. At his current depth, the resistance he faced did not hamper him by much. He took a look around him, but besides the odd fish here and there, he saw nothing of interest. "I think you should take a look at." For a moment he wondered how fish managed to survive in these monster-infested waters, but then shrugged, slipped his hands into his pockets and began to walk forward. Panda's novel calm, he was not concerned about holding his breath, as his body could go days without needing to breathe. Moreover, he could divert spiritual energy towards his lungs, and somewhat replace the function of air with it for a period of time. Not to mention, there were countless techniques out there that could allow Lex to breathe underwater, not that he was planning on relying on any of these methods. Instead, Lex planned on using a very simple, single circle array on the roof of his mouth that would produce air. He would breathe out any excess air and just take a fresh breath every few hours. Of course, he had to be careful with the amount of air he breathed. The deeper he went underwater, the greater the pressure and the more the air would shrink. He was not too worried about anything on his way down, but he had to be careful when returning to the surface. If he wasn't careful about how air expands, he could seriously injure himself. One would think that Lex could ignore such minor details due to his impressive cultivation, not to mention how sturdy his body was. To an extent, that was true. But Lex was not deluded enough to think he could take on all of nature and come out undefeated. The line between confidence and arrogance was thin, and he did not intend to cross it. Also, his intuition told him not to mess around underwater, so there wasn't much left to argue on. Not that any of this should matter. Lex's destination was not too far, or else his intuition would not have been able to detect whatever he was heading towards. After walking for about 20 minutes, Lex had descended deeper into the sea. He was pleasantly surprised to find that, instead of unspeakable horrors, the seabed was actually quite amazing. Once he moved away from the grimy, polluted waters near the town, he encountered a lot more fish. The seabed was teeming with life, so much so that Lex even detected signs of life from numerous rocks, or at least things that looked like rocks. He found a lot of debris as well, of broken ships and what looked like remains of old buildings, and all of them had been turned into habitats for the local marine life. It felt like he was walking through an aquarium. The density of fish continued to increase, right up until he came across an underwater forest. The fish swam happily through the seaweed-wrapped trees, but a sense of foreboding stopped Lex from taking a step forward. It was confusing, for his intuition was both telling him it was safe to proceed, and that he would encounter danger if he took a single step forward. What, did he have to swim instead of walk? Lex shook his head. The answer couldn't be so simple. After a few moments of thought, Lex reached out with his spirit sense and touched one of the trees. "Excuse me, is it all right if I cross?" he asked. Chapter 606, Peculiar Trilops. Silence followed Lex's question. He was not in a rush and waited a moment, thinking of other ways to enter the forest. The trees were thick and tall, with the shortest of them being at least 80 feet, 24 meters, tall and 5 feet, 1.5 meters, thick. The bark, if there was even a bark, was completely wrapped in seaweed, making it impossible to see. But the seaweed also grew between the trees, like the grass on a forest floor. Lex had suspected. "Why are you so goddamn polite?" a voice suddenly echoed in Lex's mind. The forest groaned, as if each and every tree was frustrated, but then quickly returned to the normal state. The fish had all been startled and began swimming out in droves, which frustrated the forest even more. Lex smirked. He had suspected the danger he was feeling was because the forest was actually a trilop, and it seemed he was right. It was safe to traverse so long as he had permission. If not, then he could face great danger. Isn't it natural to ask for permission before entering? What do you goddamn mean, natural? Down here, ain't no goddamn thing has any etiquette, which is the whole reason I moved here. I ain't on anyone's territory, so I can goddamn do as I please. So if someone is impolite and enters recklessly, you punish them? Well, that all depends on my mood now, doesn't it? A massive goldfish made of seaweed emerged from the forest and swam around Lex, as if inspecting him. Since the trilopfish was inspecting him, Lex saw no reason not to reciprocate. He used his targeted scan ability. Name, Toro. Age? Sex? Cultivation details? Species, trilop. Remarks, since it's not yet a guest, it can be classified as a seaweed wrap. The targeted scan only revealed partial information, and was not very consistent in what it revealed, but that was fine as Lex was no longer totally dependent on the system. Based on his own experience, as well as his intuition, alongside some basic inference, Lex could determine that Toro was an Earth immortal. He was all too familiar with the unique pressure that immortals radiated, and his intuition gave him an appropriately severe warning for Lex to be able to determine it was an immortal. Not to mention, it was unlikely a weak trilop could survive underwater where it was likely to encounter monsters. Sure, the humans cleared this area often, but who could really predict when an immortal-level monster might show up? Hadn't Zagan passed through here just a short time ago? I think you should take a look at. So what about me? Lex asked. Can I enter now that I've asked politely? What do you goddamn want by entering? Toro asked, irritated. He had been looking forward to punishing the stupid human for its insolence. But the feeble being was so inconsiderate that he had even asked nicely, leaving Toro with no good excuse to punish him. Sure, Toro didn't really need a real reason if it wanted to harm Lex, but that would be breaking the rules of its own game. If he broke the rules, then the fun of the game would disappear, and he would turn into a mad tyrant instead of a disciplined instructor, as it thought of itself. Lex considered whether to answer truthfully or come up with an excuse, but eventually decided that there was no use in lying. He could not hide his activities with the Trollops territory, so lying would instead get him in trouble. I can sense something valuable in your territory, so I came to investigate. The goldfish bared its teeth as if it did not like Lex's answer. Of course you goddamn sense something. I'm the one using the lure. Panda's novel calm. The goldfish started twisting and turning in agitation, squirming in frustration. Why are you so bloody goddamn freaking honest? The fish continued to throw a tantrum, and Lex just stood there, watching in amusement. Eventually though, Toro calmed down and glared at Lex. Follow me, he said bluntly and swam into the forest. Lex followed and was surprised to discover that all the water pressure disappeared, not that it bothered him to begin with. But he quickly realized why it was so necessary. There was a tribe of some race Lex had never seen before living in the forest, worshipping the seaweed fish. In merely a few minutes, Lex saw thousands of those creatures, which looked like humanoid squids. Despite their massive numbers, Lex could sense that not a single one of them were stronger than the Foundation realm. They probably depended on the forest to protect themselves not only from the water pressure, but from the monsters as well. Quite the community you have here, Lex commented appreciatively. He had begun to gain an understanding of Trollops. All the Trollops he had seen before had a massive number of beasts and sentient and semi-sentient creatures living within their territories, not to mention the unique personalities they had. If what Toro said was right, he had released the aura of whatever it was holding in its territory itself to attract others. Despite his strange obsession with wanting to hurt trespassers, Lex suspected he wanted more inhabitants for its territory. There was an earthquake some time ago, and it revealed this pool of a strange liquid I've never seen before, Toro suddenly started to explain. Its aura is extremely attractive, but the moment I tried to touch it, it began corrupting my body. The same happened with any other creature that touched it. Originally I thought I'd just seal off the area, but the pool is beginning to grow and I cannot seal it. The reason I allowed its aura to spread was so that others could come and I could see if anyone had a solution. If you had been impolite, I would have let you access it without the warning I'm now giving you. Lex frowned. His intuition was telling him he was heading towards something extremely valuable, but could he be wrong? It wasn't so easy to trick his intuition. What could this be? Chapter 607 Moneymaker. While Lex was wondering what he was about to encounter, various things were happening out in the universe. Even on a smaller scale, the inn itself was constantly busy, so much so that it was impossible for Lex to track everything that was happening in it all the time. Naturally, when something important happened, he would be notified or updated, but for the mundane or common things, he would not pay too much attention. As of late, even his MP accumulation was something he paid little attention to. With the amount of MP he was making, he did not need to worry about running short anytime soon. But even as far as knowing he had a lot of MP went, if Lex were to check his balance right now, he would be greatly surprised for an additional 500 billion MP had suddenly appeared. This income was not random, but was deposited to his account due to some of the tasks that Ragnar put up being completed. At this rate, it would be long until Lex earned the 1 trillion MP from his 100 trillion MP transaction. But of course, Lex would only realize this much later. For now, he followed the massive fish as it led him deeper within its territory. Even if the fish did not lead him, Lex would be able to reach the destination, for he was heading in the same direction that his intuition was guiding him to. The closer he got, the stronger his intuition urged him to hurry up. If he had not been warned by Toro, he would have genuinely believed he was about to discover ambrosia, instead of a possibly toxic pool. There was something deeply unsettling about this. Either the pool had to be used in a certain way to gain its benefits, which the Trollop was ignorant of, which is why it suffered. Or else, the pool was something extremely sinister, with the ability to bait the senses of intelligent beings. Considering the fact that a most likely Earth Immortal level Trollop was hurt by the pool, Lex did not allow himself to feel arrogant for even a moment. He had to treat the matter very seriously. Soon, Lex identified the area where the pool most likely emerged. He did not need to rely on his intuition or even the fish to tell, for the forest around it had decayed. The trees were wilting and the seaweed growing from the ground had completely disappeared. A cage surrounded the area, blocking off the multitudes of fish and other races that were trying to enter and reach the pool. An ominous feeling filled Lex's mind as he saw the influence the pool had wrought. This was especially so because by now it wasn't only his intuition that was informing him of how valuable the upcoming pool was, it was his actual physical body. He could feel a physical attraction pulling him closer, as if his body had been parched for eons and a glass of water was almost within reach. Lex felt like asking Toro some more questions, and so quickly thought of the politest way to phrase it. Although the Trollope had a peculiar personality, as long as Lex remembered to stay polite, he should not encounter any danger. The reason you allowed the aura to escape was to see if anyone could get rid of the pool, right? If you've discovered something, could you please share it with me? I would be most grateful. Toro's body trembled, as if he had been electrocuted. He glared at Lex, but they were in a relatively public place now, so it refrained from cursing the previous 17 generations of Lex's family. After all, as the lord of this region, it had an image to maintain. Although to an outside observer, it may look like my territory is only this forest, but they would be wrong. My territory extends as deep as the roots of the plants go. As such, I know for a fact that there was no such pool under the ground that the earthquake could have brought to the surface. In fact, even now, though it may appear as if the pool is emerging from underground, the truth is that there is no source down below. Though the pool appeared after the earthquake, it has no real source. It suddenly appeared, and I cannot tell how it is growing. It's a goddamn menace. Toro was, of course, speaking to Lex through its spirit sense, so no one could hear it. I do, however, have suspicions. The more materials it corrupts and dissolves, the greater the pool grows. I can only guess that, whatever the pool is, it is turning everything into itself. Toro paused as they approached the cage and stared through to a glow visible in the distance. Even at the bottom of the sea, a small pool was distinctly visible inside a bowl-shaped rock. The pool could not have been bigger than 12 liters, at most, yet its presence was massive. It had a white and silverish appearance and gave off a beautiful and mesmerizing glow I think you should take a look at. The only word Lex could think to describe both its visage and aura was holy. The pool seemed the very definition of pure and felt as if it could cradle all of life. The impression it created was so strong that Lex almost ignored the dichotomy of the site where every living thing near it had already died. Do you know what kind of power immortals wield? Toro asked Lex, his voice strangely devoid of anger and frustration. No, not really. The power of an immortal comes from his tenets, Toro explained, strangely calm. Do you know what laws are? Universal laws? Tenets allow immortals to, very barely, interact with the laws of the universe. The only way I've been able to slow down the spread of this pool is by suppressing it with my tenet. But even then, it is only able to suppress it, and not stop it. Lex appreciated the information, especially since it was giving him revelations into information he had no access to before. But the fact that Toro was not insulting him, or resisting the urge to insult, and was revealing such sensitive information without prompting was highly suspicious. Why are you telling me this? Lex asked, his gaze still stuck to the pool. How could it be so beautiful? He wanted nothing more than to take a sip of it. Because, other than me, you are the only one who has not become completely enthralled by it after looking at it. I hope you have a solution. As soon as Toro spoke, Lex realized that all the creatures that were trying to approach it were simply being blocked by the cage. They were not fighting against it, trying to destroy it, or finding some other way through. They were simply pressed against the cage as they tried to approach the pool, like mindless zombies. It was strange, now that Lex thought about it. Although he was feeling a very strong urge to drink from the pool, it was nowhere near irresistible, nor did he feel like his mind was being influenced in any way. Lex had no way of knowing what the liquid in the pool was, but he had a few ideas of how he could find out. Can you let me through to investigate? He asked, remembering to retain his politeness. Sure, Toro said, and wrapped Lex with some seaweed. In fact, if you discover a way to get rid of it, or take it away, you can have all of it. I won't stop you. Lex wanted to nod, but wrapped in seaweed, he could not really move. Toro was not imprisoning him, merely encasing him in his tenet so that Lex could enter the cage. After a couple of minutes, when Toro released the seaweed, Lex discovered that he was already inside, right beside the pool. This close, Lex could practically smell the liquid in the pool. But, of course, he could not really smell it. It was the smell of the spiritual energy that the pool was giving off, and it was as sweet as the kindest melody, as gentle as a lover's kiss. Lex could feel as if the world itself was softly hugging him, providing him with warmth, comfort, and security. It was the most pleasant sensation Lex could imagine feeling. A part of Lex wanted to bottle up this liquid and just hide a bit of it in his most expensive rooms at the inn. His capitalist senses were tingling. Yes, drinking it might be wonderful, if it wasn't an all-corroding, poisonous. But making endless amounts of MP from it and raising the prestige of the inn beyond what it already would be even more wonderful. With a grin that went from being wholesome to sly, Lex took out a glass bottle from his spatial bangle. It was time to see if he could collect this new money maker. Chapter 608 Unexpected Reactions. The glass bottle that Lex took out was only a very mundane glass bottle. It was not made from any spiritual material, nor did it have any mystical abilities. The reason Lex took this out first was because he wanted to get an idea for how quickly the liquid worked, and if it worked on ordinary materials as well, or was it restricted to living beings. In scientific terms, if Lex were conducting an experiment, then the glass bottle would be the control. Once he had an understanding of how the liquid, which Lex had started to call holy water temporarily, behaved, then he could find a suitable container for it. Using his spirit sense, he grabbed the bottle and lifted it into the air. Slowly, so as to not cause a splash, he dipped the bottle into the holy water and filled it to the brim. Then he lifted the bottle up in the air, holding it directly above the pool in case the bottle also dissolved. But Lex did not even have time to properly get in position. Even just as he was about to begin waiting, the glass cracked, and then shattered. The pieces fell into the pool alongside the extracted liquid and quickly settled to the bottom. Suffice to say, the holy water was not harmless. Next, he took out a jade bottle. It had some medicine Lex had stored for emergency situations, in case encountered someone who was hurt, and removed it. Even as far as special containers went, this jade bottle was still not the best, but it contained a trace of a spiritual attribute, used to retain the medicinal potency of whatever it held. It was also sturdier than glass, and not as easily broken. He repeated the process, but did not get much better results. Although the jade did not immediately shatter the way the glass bottle did, it was immediately covered in small cracks, which eventually grew until the jade broke apart. Next, Lex took out something he hadn't used in a long time, a bottle of bought lamb dew. It was not the dew Lex was after, but rather the bottle it came in. Regardless of all its shortcomings, the one thing Lex could never accuse the system of was giving him low-quality items. If this bottle didn't work, then Lex would officially run out of containers. It wasn't as if he went around with his spatial bangle full of bottles to use for various situations. Once again, he repeated the process, but although the bottle resisted for a little longer, it too eventually broke. By now, all the shards of glass and jade that had fallen into the holy water previously had disappeared, and Lex detected the slightest increase in the size of the pool. The increase was so small, he would not have noticed it if he weren't looking for it. Lex paused for a moment and considered the situation. Although he planned on conducting a few more tests, it seemed fairly certain that anything he would use to try to contain the liquid would dissolve. That was an issue, for if he wanted to submit the liquid into the gift shop so that he could discover what it was, he would need to at least contain it for a few minutes. After all, returning to the inn from the crystal realm took quite a bit longer than normal. If he had to go on by what Toro said, the only thing that could contain the liquid were his tenets, but that was only because they interacted with laws. Based on that, he could think of two ways to contain the liquid. Either he could use a raise, or he could try his own spirit energy since he had suspicions that it had something to do with laws. But it was best to be sure first, so he continued his tests of trying to contain the liquid. Since he had run out of containers, he tried other things. He tried soaking the liquid up in some cloth. He tried storing it in the curves of some metallic armor. He tried freezing it so that it would become solid. Nothing seemed to work, as any material it interacted with would dissolve, and temperature seemed to have no effect on it. In the end, Lex became too impatient and began to devise a way to trap the liquid using an array. His plan was simple. He would store a single drop of liquid trapped inside an array which kept it floating in the middle so the liquid would never actually come in contact with the array. The array itself would then be fit inside a container so that Lex could move it around. He would make the array so that it would last for at least 30 minutes, which would give him plenty of time to send it to the gift shop and read its description. Coming up with the relevant array was pretty easy. Lex had long devised his own way to create arrays by implementing structures similar to functions in programming languages. Of course, this was only true for simpler arrays. If the array had to perform complex actions, or bring about extremely powerful reactions, he would still need to spend more time working on them. A minute later, he finalized the array and activated it. At first, it seemed to work. The drop of liquid was suspended in the air, kept there by a gentle yet constant push generated by the array. Even Toro, who was watching from afar, seemed surprisingly hopeful. "I think you should take a look at." But then something happened that Lex had not foreseen. The array ran out of power all too quickly. According to Lex's design, the array should have lasted for 30 minutes, yet it had not even lasted for 3 seconds. What's more, as the drop fell back to the pool, it turned into 2 drops right before Lex's eyes. He couldn't believe it. This time, he tried again, but with an array designed to last much longer. This time Lex spent well over 20 minutes to design the array, making sure there were no flaws, and that it would last at least a couple of days. He did not mind brute-forcing a solution, but the premise was that the consumption of the array's energy stayed constant to what Lex had already witnessed. He tried again, and once again a single drop was suspended into the air. 1, 2, 3. Lex counted in his mind. When he reached 10 seconds and saw that the array was not destabilizing, he felt himself relax. If the array lasted at least a few minutes. Before the thought was even complete, the array collapsed, and this time, the single drop turned into dozens of drops, causing a ripple in the puddle when they fell back. "Don't do that again," warned Toro. "It's increasing the size of the pool too fast." The more the liquid accumulates, the stronger its effect becomes on the surrounding creatures. Lex frowned. The more troublesome this liquid was, the more he wanted to get his hands on it. But he was running out of ideas. The only thing left to do was try out his own spirit energy, or perhaps his own body. There was a reason Lex hadn't tried directly using his spirit sense on the liquid. Since it could corrode even an immortal, chances were it would do the same to him, and he really didn't want to face the hassle of recovering from another injury. He wasn't really concerned about any significant damage to himself, though. Although healing was very annoying for him, he had all the benefits of a body cultivator and more. That meant that, at this point, even if he lost a limb, with enough time and energy, he could grow it back. With a sigh, Lex steadied his mental state. He assumed that, even if the liquid did not corrode him, once he touched it, his desire to drink it would multiply. But until he verified what this liquid really was, and what it did, he could not take that risk. He used the technique impervious hands and slowly dipped the tip of his finger in the liquid. As soon as he felt any harm he would immediately pull out, but he was not at all ready for what happened when he touched it. The lotus tattoo on his back stirred. The lotus had fallen asleep after the immense effort it put into refining Lex's body when he was previously injured, but the moment Lex touched the liquid it began to wake up. It wasn't that the lotus was attracted to the liquid. No, instead, it felt great danger. But even before the lotus could fully wake up and respond to the danger somehow, a stream of information rushed into Lex's head from a very familiar source. Regal Embrace had identified the liquid, and immediately told Lex to drink it up. This was the kind of resources that he desperately needed to evolve his cultivation technique, but could never hope to actually encounter. Chapter 609, Cosmic Erosion Elixir. Lex had previously already given out a strict set of instructions to Mary and the various workers of the inn to go by, not to mention the fact that every so often he would use his remote presence to drop in and monitor things. Many important things were happening at the same time during this period. First, the festival at the inn had entered the winter phase. The weather of the entire inn had changed for the first time, blanketing it all in snow. The architecture of various buildings had changed to suit the new weather, and the kinds of services being offered had changed as well. The golf carts had turned into snowmobiles, and hot springs had cropped up all around the inn. Some specific regions even had extreme weather, dropping well below -100°C, though of course they were far away from the densely populated areas. One minor realm had been selected to be sold to the refugees, and the council had, under the supervision of Luther, come up with a payment plan for it. Since a one-time payment was incredibly difficult, the refugees would continue to pay installments for 50 years. Moreover, since this wasn't a transaction through official system channels, Lex had set up a few conditions. The overall price of the minor realm was set at 30 trillion MP. This was not a lot, considering the fact that the minor realm not only had better spiritual energy than Earth itself, but was full of various natural resources that would belong to the refugees to harvest. A portion of that price would be paid in MP, but the larger portion would be directly transferred over to the inn in physical form. That meant Lex would collect the payment in the form of valuable resources such as gold, spirit stones, metal ores, valuable medical herbs, secret treasures, unique spirit tech and more. The first deposit of 300 million MP had come from the accumulated personal wealth of all the millions of refugees, as well as some of the council's reserves. Although the situation on Earth had developed so that fewer and fewer refugees were coming through, the council still treated the minor realm as their failsafe in case the war went poorly. In fact, some council members had already completely given up on Earth and decided to focus on developing the minor realm into their own personal kingdoms. Other than these, the inn's workers had also selected a minor realm which would solely belong to them. The Jotun Empire had also by now begun to promote their private minor realm to humans, attracting many to go and train at the pagoda. In fact, many were already in there, including a few prominent people such as Z, Gerard, Will Bentham and Noman but the human lie detector. Oddly enough though, despite the many people entering, very few were able to make it as far as Lex and Alexander. It was only now that so many that were entering that the soldiers in charge of recording the pagoda information realized how remarkable their achievement was. All in all, the scene at the inn seemed peaceful and prosperous. In contrast, the seeds of war were beginning to bloom across the entire origin realm. The change brought about by the energy released into the origin realm by the Innkeeper was finally becoming noticeable. More and more powerful cultivators and unique beasts and creatures were beginning to appear, their strength increased by the sudden surplus of cultivation materials. I think you should take a look at. Previously, such growth would be slow and natural, meaning that the status quo would be undisturbed as everyone would naturally find their place within it. But with such a sudden surge in powerful beings, everyone believed themselves special, and wanted to resist the greater powers to have their own organizations and influence. Normally, such actions would have brought them a swift death, but the sheer scale of the event was actually bringing about great pressure on the pre-established powers. Even the Jotun Empire was showing signs of trouble, but it was fortunate that the three great noble families had suddenly become very active, and began suppressing dissidents. All of this was not even considering the sudden upsurge in Fugan attacks. This could no longer even be called the calm before the storm. The storm was already arriving, and chaos was brewing. Conspiracies thousands of years in the making were coming to fruition, empires seemingly indestructible were crumbling from within, and races that had long been suppressed, and were waiting for an opportunity to revolt, were beginning to make their move. Amidst all of this, numerous students of the acclaimed Ventura Academy were once again returning to their respective powers, at least in the origin realm. If they were coming to help their powers tide over difficult times, or if they had some secret agenda was still to be seen. None of this should have had anything to do with Lex, but the Innkeeper and the Midnight Inn could not escape its influence. The Henali had given their response to the Innkeeper. The inn's battlefield was decided, and it was in a galaxy that had almost no human presence at all. Instead, it was a galaxy controlled by elves called Swera. Coincidentally, or perhaps not so, that was the same galaxy the mysterious man had told Lex to visit to find an unknown valuable item. But while the Henali had decided on the inn's battlefield, the order had not yet reached the inn and thus Lex. Which was fortunate, because Lex was thoroughly preoccupied at the moment. He stared at the shining liquid, which was anything but the holy water Lex had originally decided to call it, an ominous look in his eyes. His cultivation technique had given him a detailed description of the liquid, which was known as cosmic erosion elixir. This extremely rare liquid was produced in only 2 known circumstances. It could either be produced by a Dowlord by using their power to slowly and carefully grind space out of existence, or during a relatively very brief period of time when a seemingly stable realm begins to destabilize, on the course for self-destruction. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 610 Reverence. The circumstances required for the production of cosmic erosion elixir were extremely stringent, even on a universal scale. In fact, even if many minor realms or realms were destroyed, they might not produce this elixir. The first most important requirement was that the realm needed to be extremely stable, and should otherwise appear completely in line with its normal life cycle. The stability of the realm meant that the space it constituted would be extremely stable, and capable of healing normally and naturally should anything happen. The second requirement was a significant and constant destabilizing factor. This factor should be strong enough to strain the laws of the realm constantly, but not strong enough to actually unravel the functionality of the realm or its laws. The third requirement was that the realm should not be fully mature, and should still be in the growing phase of its life cycle. The fourth requirement was a sufficiently long enough duration of time to pass without any of the prior requirements changing. The natural inclination of the realm to grow would increase the stress on the laws of the realm caused by the destabilizing factor, without unraveling them. The otherwise stability of the realm alongside the increased stress would, in random locations, cause space itself to begin to disintegrate. The byproduct of this disintegration was the cosmic erosion elixir, which was a physical manifestation of the various laws that used to occupy the space that had been destroyed. The reason why this liquid was so attractive to all living beings was because of those said laws, which could directly elevate them to a higher life form. Lex himself had undergone such evolutions through the natural sequence, which occurred every time he rose from one cultivation realm to another. But if he followed this path, then his maximum ceiling for evolving higher was fixed to the number of cultivation realms he could cross. Items and treasures, which could elevate the life form without going through the process of raising a cultivation realm, were so rare that they were essentially never sold. There was no price for them in the market because it had never happened before. Yet the reason no one could make use of this cosmic erosion elixir was because it had to do with laws, and their bodies could not handle the strain on directly touching laws. The only reason Lex was not suffering a similar fate was because his body had literally used fragments of laws to upgrade itself. If he used the elixir to reach a higher life form level than he was supposed to be at, he would begin to understand how important and valuable such a thing was. But it was not meant to be, for now at least. His cultivation technique had called first dibs, and informed him of how he could use this liquid to slowly augment the existing laws that made up his body as well as influence his affinity, so that slowly it would change in a direction which would allow him to enter the next realm. Of course, the elixir alone was not enough to achieve such a thing, but it was a start. That gave Lex an amazing idea. Not only could he use this elixir, he could transport it to the inn. He would use however much of it was needed for his own upgrade and trade the rest to get other materials with similar effects so he could continue to upgrade himself. After all, although he knew he could fix his cultivation if he got an SSS plus rank on a quest, such a thing was easier said than done. Every time he had completed a quest with such a high ranking, it had been completely based on luck, and was a result of the involvement of extremely high-leveled cultivators. I think you should take a look at A part of him wanted to keep the elixir forever, continuously feeding it items to allow it to grow, but such a thing was not possible. Apparently, the elixir would only exist for a very short time before the laws within it would naturally reorient themselves, causing the liquid to disappear. If there was one fortunate thing, it was that he now knew how he could transport the liquid. Since his body and spiritual energy would not be corroded by the elixir, he only needed to use them. He used a curved imperial shield, and scooped up all the elixir into it like a massive bowl. He would first take it back to the Midnight Inn before consuming it. He did not know what kind of reaction would occur once he did, and did not want to leave himself vulnerable to external influence. "I'll be back," Lex told Toro, before eventually disappearing to the inn. He teleported to his personal meditation room before using his influence over the system to create an especially expensive and powerful basin for the liquid before pouring it in. He did not know how long the liquid would continue to exist, he had to be quick. The lotus, which had finally woken up, was frightened silly when it sensed Lex drinking the elixir. That was not soup, but laws. Even it did not dare absorb such a thing, for if he was not able to perfectly influence how those laws were absorbed, its body itself would instead be absorbed by the laws. That was a fact that Lex's cultivation technique had already mentioned, but had already given a solution to. So, while Lex went ahead and augmented his cultivation, the incredibly powerful lotus on his back was filled with reverence for the incredible Innkeeper. He was truly beyond common sense. With that thought, the lotus went back to sleep. Since Lex's body was a carrier for the lotus, the stronger his body, the faster the lotus would mature. With Lex doing something as daring as drinking the elixir, there was no doubt the lotus maturing speed would continue to increase. It was fortunate that the lotus had gone back to sleep, for the reverence it had built up might have been severely affected when it noticed that, instead of entering a state of cultivation upon drinking the elixir, Lex immediately teleported to the restroom. The elixir had given him a bad case of diarrhea. Chapter 611 Potent Fertilizer. Regal Embrace had given Lex detailed instructions on what to do to absorb the elixir. He would first start using his cultivation technique, and only after he had used it for one complete cycle would he take a single sip from it, while continuing to run his technique. As soon as he took the sip, his cultivation technique would stop absorbing spiritual energy from the air, and instead use the elixir to increase his cultivation. The actual process of what happened next was quite complicated, but all Lex needed to do was ensure he didn't stop cultivating. As soon as he took the sip, and his cultivation technique began using the elixir to affect his body and infinity, Lex was hit with a sensation he hadn't experienced in quite a while. He needed to use the restroom, and he needed to use it now. The urgency of the situation nearly interrupted his cultivation, so he immediately entered the flow state to ensure he did not mess things up. This way, he teleported to the restroom while still running his cultivation technique. What happened next was disastrous. There was no Mexican food on Earth Mexican enough, nor spice strong enough to devastate Lex's stomach the way it was now. If Lex was not in his flow state, he definitely would not have been able to continue cultivating. The gurgles in his stomach were like rolls of thunder. If Lex were not at the inn, and had been elsewhere, earthquakes would have rocked the area around him. Although the method was unconventional, Regal Embrace was using the laws and the elixir to perfectly stabilize his body, so that the laws he contained would be in perfect equilibrium instead of being a random hodgepodge. Moreover, although laws were incredibly powerful and definitely beyond Lex's level, thus increasing his strength drastically, not all laws were suitable for him. Due to his breakthrough, while the inn was undergoing a star-level increase, a random assortment of laws had been absorbed into his body. While he had survived the experience, it did not mean that those laws were actually helping him. In fact, many of the laws that made up his body were going against the natural foundation he had built up since he started cultivating. It was the difference between randomly getting a power-up through the use of treasures beyond one's level, and a conscientious effort using the most optimal resources to systematically increase your power. While both would give you a power-up, one would leave you unable to grow further, while the other would not only give you a higher power ceiling you could achieve within the same realm, but also make your final destination much higher than before. In a way, Lex was already on the path to transcending the original description of the regal embrace. That did not mean his defense would be even higher than it should have been. No, the cultivation technique had already aimed for the highest possible achievable defense right from the get-go. Instead, besides the ridiculous defense, Lex would also gain other incredible attributes. For example, besides Lex's abnormal affinity for defensive techniques, he may gain an affinity for other types of techniques as well. Since he could learn defensive techniques at a glance, and even upgrade them, imagine if he could do the same for movement techniques? Or offensive techniques? Techniques based on the applications of space? Lex could only use such thoughts to distract himself as his cultivation technique slowly and effectively removed the unnecessary, or even obstructive laws that his body had. In their place, the laws within the elixir were being used. I think you should take a look at. Although he was once again undergoing a fundamental change in his body's makeup, he was more embarrassed than in pain. No, he couldn't continue to dwell on the matter, or even his state of flow would be broken. He turned his thoughts to something else that had occurred to him when he found out about the elixir, but didn't have time to contemplate on. The elixir was formed when there was an instability affecting the realm. It was not a big jump to assume that whatever anomaly he was supposed to be investigating was the very same instability that had put the crystal realm on the path for destruction. He did not know how much the local powerhouses of the crystal knew about the anomaly, but he was fairly certain they didn't know that the realm was on the path to destruction. According to his original guess, they were using the anomaly and the craven to fulfill some grand plan, or perhaps they were farming some extremely rare resources. All in all, there was some secret plan they were exploiting the craven for. But if they knew that their continued exploitation had likely put their realm on the path to destruction, he doubted they would behave so audaciously. This piece of information was more than sufficient for him to venture towards Valesco and meet that crystal race elder. In the meantime, there was also the chance that he could learn more from the Noel and Phillips family. Lex could feel that he was incredibly close to solving this mystery. While Lex was busy thinking every possible random thought he could to distract himself, there was a certain area of the inn he had purposefully blocked off all news from to himself. No matter what happened there, for now, Lex would not know. There was a simple reason for that. The Midnight Inn was a closed system, meaning that everything that happened there stayed within. The remnants of the laws that were being released from Lex's body were not mysteriously vanishing. No, they were being recycled, and then transported to the special area that Lex had blocked all news from, the greenhouse. "Oh dear, such potent fertilizer," commented the turtle as bags of fresh fertilizer were being teleported to the greenhouse. These would be extremely useful in helping the vine growing beside the fire temple. Chapter 612 A Deal. One excruciating hour later, Lex was finally done. His digestion of the single sip of elixir was complete. Although he could immediately go and start digesting the second sip, he was mentally drained from his experience. This was not a comment on his emotional trauma from the experience. The difficulty of keeping his cultivation technique running under such strenuous circumstances had actually drained him. It would take him some time to recover before was in any condition to undergo another round of cultivation. But that did not mean he had any time to waste. There was no telling how long the elixir would last. According to the information given to him by Regal Embrace, the elixir would last, at most, for a week. He had no time to waste. Instead of returning to the crystal realm, Lex instead went to X-142. This set of planets had been very fruitful for Lex, not only because it was a great source of various guests, but because of the Infinity Emporium. Although Lex had not purposefully sold a golden key to the Emporium, considering the fact that a lot of people on the planet were becoming regulars of the inn, he was surprised that the Emporium had not discovered it yet. Or maybe it had, but was purposefully avoiding it. Whatever the reason, so long as they continued to be useful to Lex, he would not pry too deeply into their matter either. As usual, he saw many guests walking in and out of the Emporium, but knew that when he entered, he would be alone in the shop. He saw a vaguely familiar person exit the store, and then quickly scurry away. Lex paused for a moment as he tried to recall if he had actually ever met that person, or if he was an important guest. It took only a moment for Lex to recall a tavern he had stayed in on X-142 when he first arrived called Bent Benches. The tavern keeper had been some poor fellow with extremely severe anxiety issues. Lex turned and saw that the man was still quite jittery, and was doing his best to stay away from people as he continued on his path. Lex shook his head. Anxiety was truly an unfortunate ailment to have. Putting the matter behind him, he entered the shop to once again be greeted by the familiar Powell. "My friend, it is always a good day when I see you," Powell exclaimed with genuine joy in his voice. "Haha, well, then today is about to be a very good day for you," Lex said, walked up to the counter. "I have a great deal for you today." "Why the rush to talk of business? Why don't you relax a little, you look weary." Not waiting for Lex to respond, Powell brought out a bottle from underneath the counter as well as a couple of glasses and poured Lex a drink. Considering the fact that Lex was a high-level member of the Emporium, not only did he have access to some of their best items and inventory, he could get amazing perks as well. This drink, it seemed, was one of them. Lex did not reject, and took a sip from the hazel-colored drink, only to feel reinvigorated immediately. All his exhaustion disappeared with a single sip. Unfortunately, Lex wasn't too happy about that. This only meant he would have to go back and cultivate. "I wish I had the time to relax, Powell, but I have a time-sensitive matter that I need to handle. I think you should take a look at." "Tell me about it," Powell said, not prodding Lex to relax any further. Considering Lex's status, it was only normal for him to try and maintain a good relationship with him. But if the man was focused on work, who was he to keep diverging from the topic? Lex smiled for a moment, as he anticipated Powell's reaction to the matter. "Have you ever heard of cosmic erosion elixir?" he asked, leaning forward. For a moment Powell did not respond, as he tried to recall the name. The moment he did, his expression changed minutely, but he tried not to show it. "Yes, I've heard of it. But if you're hoping to buy, unfortunately we do not have any way of getting our hands on it." Although Powell was rejecting him, he was unable to hide the hint of expectation the man had on his face. Obviously he had a suspicion, but he did not allow himself to hope it was true. "That's even better, because I want to sell some. The rarity of it should help me get a better price." "Are you sure?" Powell asked, barely keeping himself from jumping up. "Are you sure it's the elixir?" "Completely sure, though before I am able to sell it to you, I'll need something from you. I'll need a few containers in which I can store the elixir. Everything I have completely dissolves when I try to store the elixir in it." "That's no problem at all," Powell said, completely understanding. "In fact, as long as you really have the elixir, and sell it to the Emporium, I'll give you a few containers for free. They're extremely valuable, and can be used to store even other precious liquids." "That's great. But now, let's talk about something much more relevant, the price. What can the Emporium pay for the elixir?" Powell suddenly put on a serious expression and lifted a latch on his counter, inviting Lex in. "Follow me, let's discuss this in a better setting. For something of this level, I'll need to contain our head office, so it'll take a few minutes to get the relevant data." Lex followed Powell into a very luxurious room and took a seat on a sofa while Powell pulled out a tablet and began working furiously. He did not know how far the so-called headquarters were, but the communication was quite quick if it only took a few minutes. Chapter 613 Powell and Powell. Lex watched in silence as Powell excitedly interacted with his tablet. Sometimes the man was so professional, yet at other times, especially when it was a matter of his own commission, he could show a childlike giddiness. Soon he put down the tablet and looked at Lex. "Good news. Because of your level at the Infinity Emporium, as well as our history together, I've been promoted significantly. Headquarters will give me special training so that in the future, I will permanently deal with all your transactions. There will no longer ever be a situation where I need to contact headquarters to give you an answer to one of your questions. Moreover, you yourself have become a VIP member of the Emporium. Your level is no longer denoted by number, as you are completely eligible for the highest authority the Emporium has to offer. Moreover, the owner of the Emporium has taken notice of your latest request, and is personally making his way over. This deal, he will complete himself. The owner? Lex asked, surprised. He did not expect to attract the attention of the owner of the Emporium, although it made sense. The description of the elixir stated that it was extremely rare, and there were only 2 known ways of making it, the first involving downlords. Moreover, while Lex knew how he could personally use it, he didn't really know what other actual uses it had. Surely they were extremely useful. The only concern was, how long would it take for the owner to reach them? Lex was in a time crunch. Before he could ask, however, the door to the room they were in opened, and an extremely familiar man walked in. "You've done a great job, Powell," the man said, his voice confident yet smooth as butter. "For now, you can go on and report for your special training. I will take care of things from here." "Yes, sir," Powell exclaimed full of energy, and saluted the owner of the Emporium, before he bowed excitedly towards Lex as well. Then he ran off outside, practically giggling, and shut the door behind him. Meanwhile, Lex said nothing as he was thoroughly confused. The man he was looking at was Powell himself. There were 2 of them? This should not have been such a big surprise, for even on Earth there were identical twins. But the thing was, Lex was not only looking with his eyes. His intuition, spirit sense, and soul sense all told him that he was looking at the same man. Both Powells were exactly one and the same. Lex could have explained such a situation by saying that one Powell was the clone of the other, but then why did they have different memories, feelings, and identities, yet seem to be the same person? The remaining Powell looked at Lex with a smile, and seemed to understand exactly what he was thinking. "I think you should take a look at. Before we begin, Mr. Lex, allow me to say, I am incredibly honored to finally meet you. Though there was not an opportunity to meet before this, I have long paid attention to your transactions. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Emporium and all its employees for your continued loyalty and support. Your service has always been excellent." "I have no reason not to come back," Lex replied with complete composure, despite his confused state. "I know you are in a bit of a rush, but would you like a bit of a proper introduction to the Emporium? Perhaps that will answer some of your questions. Or if you have other commitments, we can get right to work, and then you can ask Powell any questions you have in the future. He will have the knowledge and authorization to answer you when you meet next," the owner ensured. "Please, have a seat," Lex said, pointing towards a nearby sofa. "Although I am in a rush, it is not to the level where I can't even sit for a simple conversation." Velma had become extremely busy as of late due to her new profession as well as the immense responsibility the innkeeper placed on her. If she had to do all that, while maintaining her passion of gossiping, she would need 100 clones of herself. So, lately, that is what she had turned her attention towards. She visited the Midnight Library and found some of the best cloning techniques available. None of them were exactly what she was looking for, but they could meet her basic requirements if only barely. But her cultivation was too low for the best techniques, so she had begun to remedy that. She was cultivating non-stop, and had even visited the soul pond built by Harry. The pond helped her increase her soul strength just enough, where she could use one of the most basic but effective cloning techniques. It involved splitting a small piece of one's soul and storing it inside a sufficiently strong treasure. This would not be any random treasure, but a specially designed treasure for this specific purpose. Once a soul was stored inside, spirit stones could be added into the treasure to form a spirit energy clone which was completely controlled by the clone. The clone had half the strength of a mortal, but otherwise was perfectly able to replicate a normal human. For Velma's purposes it was enough, for all the clone needed to do was pay attention to gossip and compile the newsletter while Velma herself focused on raising her cultivation level. It did not really need any significant strength for that. Moreover, all the information the clone received was immediately shared with the main soul so long as they were within a certain range, so it was not really an issue. But within her meditation room, Delma suddenly opened her eyes in shock and quickly ended her round of cultivation. She just received important news about a person the innkeeper had told her to keep an eye on. Garland, the snake which had won the fishing competition, had been assassinated on its home planet. Chapter 6:14 Not as good as the innkeeper. Lex and the owner of the Emporium sat face to face, leaning comfortably in their chairs as if they were old friends catching up instead of two people about to conduct a business transaction. Lex's intuition, as well as his great experience, gave him a very clear warning. The person in front of him was ridiculously powerful, to the point where Lex did not even risk using his targeted scan ability. Besides the single moment where Lex first saw him, and ended up using his spirit and soul sense, he did not dare to even bring them out of his body now. Despite all that, Lex remained perfectly calm. He could no longer be intimidated by powerful cultivators the way he used to be before. Moreover, a business deal was a type of war on its own. He could not give up his psychological advantage due to the difference in cultivation levels. Lex had always pretended to have a powerful backer in his transactions with the Emporium, so he would continue to behave that way. But he was curious about one thing in particular. According to his information, Emperor Jotun was supposed to be the most powerful human in the entire Origin realm. But even if that were the case, the owner of the Emporium should not have been an unknown person. Lex had perused the top 1,000 strongest humans list compiled on the Henali portal. Although it was an unofficial list, it contained a lot of information. Yet this person was completely unknown. Or perhaps there were secrets Lex had just missed out on. "Allow me to first introduce myself, and then my Emporium to you," the man said, not allowing an awkward silence to develop between them. Yet by speaking first, he had voluntarily given up the psychological advantage. He had placed Lex in a superior position, where he was the one giving Lex the explanation. Either he was not interested in such mind games, or he was so powerful and confident that he felt like he could ignore their consequences. "My name, as you may be able to guess, is Powell," he said with a bright smile. "You might find it slightly confusing, but you can consider all the workers at the Emporium as clones of myself." "All the workers?" Lex asked, not hiding the surprise in his voice. In this situation, maintaining perfect composure would build a distance between them. It would seem as if Lex was from too large a background, and did not care about Powell. But by reacting where Powell might expect him to react would give the man a sense of satisfaction and give him a positive impression of Lex. Of course, he could not take it too far. Lex was only trying to build a good relationship, not trying to become a yes man. They are not exactly clones in the traditional sense, but you may consider it as such. It is an aspect of my cultivation technique. Moreover, there is no employee more reliable than myself. Lex disagreed. He felt like the inn's employees were the most reliable, but he didn't voice the thought and allowed him to explain. "I think you should take a look at. I started the Emporium with a dream. I was young and broke when I dreamt of endless riches, so much so that even the stars could not shine as brightly as my hoard. But other than just wealth, I wanted my wealth to come from a place that made a difference. I wanted to start a business that could benefit everyone. So in pursuit of my humble dream, I am trying to bring the Emporium to every corner of the Origin realm. I want the Emporium to be the biggest commerce entity in the entire realm." The spiritual energy buzzed with the excitement and passion in Powell's voice. Even if he wasn't trying, the world around him was reacting to his emotions. It reminded Lex of the way the inn's weather was affected by his mood when he became upset. "I have come a great way, though I am still a little far from reaching my goal. Let me share a small secret with you, to thank you for your faith in the Emporium so far, and to assure you of our capabilities to serve you even in the future." Sitting in his chair, Lex felt like he could give Powell some pointers on marketing and customer psychology. He too had dealt with guests at the inn, but Powell was going about it all wrong. He could be appreciative of guests and their patronage, but he also needed to display a certain level of detachment. Powell had gained great success, no doubt, but in the end, he was no match for the innkeeper. "You may have noticed that every time you enter the Emporium, you arrive at the shop alone regardless of how many people may be going in or out. Yes, I found that extremely fascinating when I first arrived, Lex admitted. The truth of the matter is, the moment you enter the Emporium building, you're no longer on the planet you entered from. Each and every Emporium building in the realm is linked. As soon as you enter, you are teleported to the main branch as it were. Lex was surprised and perplexed. Sure, such a mass-scale teleportation, especially one so seamless, was extremely impressive. But what was the purpose? Moreover, but many times I've encountered situations where I had to wait for deliveries because I was told it was being transported from elsewhere in the galaxy, or realm. Don't tell me I was made to wait just to keep up appearances. No, nothing like that, Powell said, waving his hand. It's purely logistical and supply chain matters that delay deliveries. Although having every customer come to one destination makes it easy, as we don't need to maintain separate warehouses or actually transport goods across the wide expanse of space. But getting items to the original warehouse from wherever we are sourcing them also sometimes takes some time. I must admit, situations where our clients have to wait for deliveries are usually very rare. It's only your unique requests that often end up stumping us. Chapter 6:15 Negotiation. Lex could not help but smile a bit. His requests were either incredibly specific, such as the very specific or he needed to alter his body, or the millions of cultivation techniques he'd requested. To this date, he still regularly received batches of new techniques which he kept adding to his library. The problem was, the number of techniques had to match the kind of payment he'd made. But Lex's payment had touched upon something that touched the Downlord realm, so there was literally no value that could meet it. In the end, they could just continue to provide techniques endlessly until it became a priceless collection. Eventually, Lex planned to have them start providing nascent soul-level techniques. Although that would speed up the Emporium's payback of its debt, Lex did not actually need endless golden core realm techniques. Powell continued. The reason I told you this was because, in the future, no matter where you enter the Emporium from, you will be brought to our main shop, which is reserved for our highest level members. Moreover, you can establish an account with us, meaning that once you sell something, you will accumulate a special kind of credit called Emporium Credit, EC. You can either cash that out to a currency of your choice, or keep it to purchase items later on. It's a much easier way to keep track of your payments, and the value of each transaction. It's easy enough to understand, said Lex, as if it was the first time he was encountering such a thing. The ease and convenience of our clients is our first priority. I can take you to the store and you can peruse our premium selection at will, but first I'd like to discuss the transaction you previously mentioned to Powell. Yes, the cosmic erosion elixir. I wish to sell some, but first I need a container in which I can transport the elixir itself. If you don't mind my asking, how much elixir are you looking to sell? Lex leaned forward now, and established eye contact with Powell. Everything before this was merely a prelude to the conversation that was about to take place now. As an item with no fixed price, how much Lex would be able to gain would all depend on his own negotiation skills. Although Lex may have gained a psychological advantage before this, it would matter little if he failed to gain any tangible benefits. Moreover, he was about to find out if Powell in fact was so self-confident that he did not care about mind games, or if Lex really was superior to him in this regard. I have quite a considerable amount of elixir, Lex confided. Yet I am also using a portion of it for my own purposes. What I want to do is sell the amount I don't need before it disappears. Since I harvested the elixir today, I'd say I have about a week to make the most of it. How much of it I sell to you depends entirely on the price you're able to pay. It could be anywhere from a few drops all the way up to a liter. In fact, Lex had a lot more of the elixir than that. But he was not sure exactly how much he needed, not to mention he was planning on holding an auction in the Midnight Inn as well. He had already told Mary to spread the word about this specific auction, but only guests with a prestige level 4 and above were to be informed. I think you should take a look at. There were very few guests at that prestige level, as they would need to spend at least 10 million MP at the inn to reach such a level. In fact, the only reason the number even entered double digits is because those who performed transactions at the guild room were also counted. Powell did not react too strongly, but at the same time he did not hide his surprise at the possible availability of an entire liter of the elixir. He did not, however, show any surprise to learn that Lex was using the elixir himself. The truth was, his body projected a powerful aura of laws since his body contained laws to begin with, yet did not have the power to suppress the aura. But once his body stabilized, the aura disappeared. Yet now that he was once again adjusting his body's makeup by drinking the elixir, the aura had once again appeared. Although the aura was not completely oppressive, as it was when Lex was still undergoing his body's reconstruction, it was enough to give a casual cultivator some pressure. Even a nascent cultivator would feel pressured in Lex's presence during this period. Suffice to say, Powell could tell that Lex was somehow tempering his body using the elixir. As for how that was possible, he did not inquire. As a businessman, he respected others' personal secrets. There are many ways in which the Emporium can pay you, but I think what really matters is what you're looking for. Why don't you give me an idea for the kind of remuneration you're looking for? The small exchange, where neither of them openly quotes a price, was a sort of power play by each, trying to understand the other's psychological range for the price. If one of them said a price, such as Lex, but it turned out that it was much lower than what Powell was ready to pay, then Lex would be the one suffering the loss. This was the problem with priceless items. In the end, the final price was entirely dependent on what and how much use the buyer had for it. As it was, Lex was at a slight disadvantage since he did not know the actual value of the elixir and how it could be measured. So, instead, he opted for another option. The elixir, as you may know, contains the physical manifestation of laws. I can sell some, but I need other items which contain laws in a similar fashion. Chapter 616 Barter. The elixir, as you may know, contains the physical manifestation of laws. I can sell some, but I need other items which contain laws in a similar fashion, said Lex as he began to explain his demands. Since I know items on the level of the elixir cannot usually be sought out, and depend on luck, I won't be so harsh as to ask for items on the same level only. Inferior items are also acceptable, but then the quantity needs to be increased. How much elixir I give you depends on the kinds of resources you provide. After all, I've approached a few other circles as well, and if their offer is better than yours, then they will get more of the liquid. Powell did not show any surprise, relief or competition on his face upon hearing Lex's demands. He remained extremely professional, and immediately delved into relevant matters. One of the reasons the elixir is extremely valuable, excluding its rarity, is because it contains laws pertaining to space, he explained. He did not ask if Lex had an understanding of laws, and if so how deep it was. Instead, he chose to explain or reiterate some of the basics. That way Lex would either learn about some things without his ignorance being exposed, or he would be able to bring attention to his own upcoming proposal easily. There are a few accompanying laws, of course, such as the law of pressure, the law of power, the law of foundations, but the primary makeup is still space. That is also one of the reasons it is so difficult for it to naturally occur. Moreover, the potency of the law also depends on the maturity of the realm from which it is created. Assuming the potency of the elixir is average, there are already very few items directly as valuable as the elixir. Like you said, lower value items can be exchanged, but then the quantity will have to be adjusted, which is another hassle of its own. Based on your requirements, I can offer you a few options, and then you can choose which one suits you the most. But before I get into it, do you have any special requirements in terms of laws? Meaning, are there items of certain laws that you are more partial to, or will any laws do? This was a good question. Technically, according to Regal Embrace, Lex could absorb any items with laws, and the technique would use those laws to reorient, or replace the existing laws that were interfering with his cultivation. To be clear, if Lex wanted to use this method to fix his cultivation technique so that he could cultivate to the nascent realm, it would take far more resources than even his elixir could afford him. But at least it would put him on the right path, while increasing his strength in the process. However, what laws he absorbed would have a long-standing effect on him and his cultivation. For that reason, he was more partial to certain laws that sounded powerful. That was the only criteria he could use to understand laws, for as of right now he knew nothing about them. Any laws at all will suffice, but I will give preference to laws that have to do with healing, energy, and speed. Powell only gave a nod and continued his explanation. Many of our VIP clients often have requirements for rare or valuable resources that are not easily accessible. As it happens, we have 3 clients who have put in a request for the elixir, for a long time now I might add, and have offered remuneration in exchange that match your requirements. I think you should take a look at. If you wish to proceed, I can show you what they're offering, and the trade can take place using the Emporium as the medium. The third, however, has a few qualms. As it happens, the third client has, in fact, offered an item associated with the laws of healing, but the trade cannot be conducted by the Emporium. To complete the trade, you will have to visit the client yourself. Though, you do not need to be alarmed, as the Emporium will take responsibility for taking you to and from his planet. Other than those 3, you can also sell the elixir to the Emporium. Unfortunately, we do not have items of the same caliber matching your requirements available at the moment, but we can pay using lower-level items. During this time, I will also personally try to get my hands on items you might find suitable to trade for. But since I do not have any such items on hand, I will not mention them yet. Can you share the details for the items your clients are willing to trade? I'll have to see whether I'm willing to move forward with those trades. At the same time, you can provide me with a list of what the Emporium can offer. I'd like to deal with this matter as quickly as possible, so that the next time I visit, I bring as much of the elixir as is needed. Powell did not hesitate and handed Lex a tablet which had an extremely detailed description of each of the items his clients were willing to pay with. The identity of the first 2 clients was hidden, and only their offers were listed. The first one, coincidentally, was a diamond personally formed by Adamus, the deity of diamonds, and contained the laws of impenetrability. There was a lot of unnecessary drivel about the origin and history of the diamond, and its ceremonial and religious importance. Lex didn't care about that, for to him it was naught but a snack. The law of impenetrability would pair well with the regal embrace, however, so it wasn't bad. Alongside the diamond was the required amount of liquid Lex would have to provide to get it. It will only 300 milliliters, so Lex found it acceptable. After all, he did not understand the value of the elixir, only that the diamond would not disappear in a week so he could take his time to use it. The next item made Lex tremble, and not in a good way. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 617 Chatrooms. After the diamond, the next listed item was a single teacup with an accompanying saucer, with an extensive floral design all over it. It was neither the cup nor the saucer that caused Lex distress. Instead, it was the law associated with the items. It was the law of femininity. Even with his vast imagination, Lex did not dare imagine what would happen to him if he allowed such a law to take root within his body. This was a trade he absolutely could not participate in. Immediately, Lex swiped the details away and looked at the final offer. This time, not only was the item listed, but there was a detailed introduction about the client as well. The name of the client was Zuriadissa, and she was originally a common 4-leaf clover. Now, after the passage of countless years, she was recognized as one of the strongest beings in the origin realm, at least according to the Emporium. She had clones across the realm in hundreds of thousands of galaxies, and her influence and power were beyond imagining. The trade, if Lex agreed, would be conducted by one of her clones on a planet she inhabited. Actually, technically speaking, the entire planet, which was about 70% the size of Earth, was actually her clone. The item in question, this time, was a single blade of grass, within which was contained the law of regrowth. As if that was not enough, a number of other laws were also mentioned that played only a minor supporting role. The laws included the law of vitality, the law of refinement, and the law of healing. Although it was slightly inconvenient to go over to another planet to make the trade, this was by far the most useful to Lex. If consuming that blade of grass somehow improved Lex's healing, even if by a small margin, it was worth it. Then came the list of items the Emporium offered. Although technically they were not as valuable as the previous items, they made Lex's eyes glow. These could go a long way towards not only helping Lex, but they could directly improve the inn. In fact, in the list of items Lex was presented with, there were a number of them that had no relation to laws, but were valuable nonetheless. They would especially come in handy, especially since he wanted to strengthen his workers as quickly as possible without harming them. Just as Lex was delving into the list and beginning to pick out things that would be useful to him, Mary called out to him. "Lex, there's a situation. Strictly speaking, it doesn't really require you to do anything, but I think you might want to pay attention to future developments." The hesitation and concern in Mary's voice drew Lex's attention. This was extremely out of the ordinary. "What happened?" he asked, mentally readying himself to hear bad news. It was always bad news. It was never anyone dropping off a picnic basket for the innkeeper. "Do you remember Garland? The snake that won the system from the well? You told us to keep an eye on him and get back to you about his activities. Well, something happened to him that we learned about very recently. Apparently, he was assassinated." Velma was looking into the details of how it happened, and originally I thought I'd just update you when you come back to the inn since there's nothing you can really do about it. But just a few minutes ago, when Velma discovered the identity of the assassins, we also discovered that they had already entered the inn after the assassination. But even that wasn't enough to get me to specially update you. What really drastically changed the situation was that the assassins directly went up and challenged Ming Jia, the mountain man, and John to a fight in the murder grounds. Wait, they just went up to them and challenged them? Pretty much. I suspect they would have already picked a fight directly if they didn't want to end up offending the Midnight Inn. Is that other system user from Earth at the inn? No, currently he is on Earth. So they pretty much immediately challenged all the existing system users at the inn? I think you should take a look at. Yes. Lex was much too experienced to let his thoughts show on his face, but his mood underwent a drastic change, nonetheless. An ominous feeling overtook him, and he decided to speed up this meeting as much as possible. At the Midnight Inn, 3 rhino centaurs stood face to face, their massive heights overshadowing the other guests. Their lower bodies were that of a rhino, with thick, sturdy legs, hooved feet and a midsection that was packed with imposing muscles. From where one would expect a neck, instead a human torso appeared, though its proportions were much larger than normal humans. With biceps larger than most people's calves, a chest built like a warhammer could not budge, and a long, curved horn emerging from the human forehead, they put on a fearsome appearance. Each of them were at least 14 feet, 4.2 meters, in height. Behind them was the even more imposing figure of the mountain man. To the frequent guests of the inn, the excitement of this particular guest had long passed. He did not but sleep, no matter how one tried to interact with him. Even the 3 rhino centaurs were unable to wake him, at least without crossing the inn's rules. "It is pointless to wait here. We can just hire someone to keep an eye on him and alert us once he's awake," said one of the rhinos, using his spirit sense. "I say that is a waste of time," said another. "We should just sell his location details to someone in the chat room and get immediate benefits." "What about the other one? The inn's employee? That is also a tough situation. Based on our preliminary research into the Midnight Inn, the owner, the innkeeper, is a devastatingly powerful cultivator. It is best not to cross him. Unless this John accepts our challenge willingly, I do not see a way we can get his system either." "Are you sure this Midnight Inn isn't a part of a system either?" the second one asked, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "It would love it if it could get and absorb a system that could grant something as impressive as the inn. I've told you, according to the device, the inn has nothing to do with a system. It has never failed before, so there's no reason to believe it'll mess up now." "Easy for you to say," one of them complained. "You've already gotten your hands on the overnight celebrity system from that snake. We're the ones still lacking." That's also why I have to be even more cautious from now on. Although I myself am a member of the organization, there's always a chance one of the other members will target me. The same goes for you guys. The moment you get your hands on a system, you'll have a target on your backs. The three rhino centaurs went silent as they contemplated what to do. They did not want to give up so easily, especially since they were so close. It had taken them years as members of the organization before they actually found actual system holders. Finally, in tacit understanding, the three of them pulled up an interface in front of them. Strangely enough, the interface was not that of the Midnight Inns, and it was not visible to anyone else other than themselves. On the top of the interface were the words System Hunters Chat Room. The chat room had hundreds of billions of members across not only the Origin realm, but thousands of other realms. Yet none of them were worried that the secrets of the chat room would be divulged, their identities leaked, or the existence of the chat room itself discovered. That was because the chat room itself was responsible for maintaining its secrecy. Even if one of the members of the chat room was interrogated under torture, or their memories read, the chat room's existence would not be discovered. That was because the chat room would automatically erase all knowledge and traces linking itself to the member from existence. No one knew how the chat room came into being, but among the basic members of the chat room there was a theory that the creator of the chat room was the founder of their organization which hunted system users across the universe, and that he himself had a system linked to chat rooms. No one could say for certain as there was too much mystery associated with it. The three of them exchanged a look before a new post appeared in the chat room. It was auctioning the location of two system holders, though there was a disclosure given that the system holder's environment was extremely dangerous. Within 1 second, the post had over 1 million responses. The auction period would last for a few hours, and the chat room would administrate the auction itself, and automatically facilitate the transactions. Chapter 618 Bad Seed. Even if Lex sped up the meeting, he had to go through the necessary steps. He had to pick who he was trading with, and in the case of the Emporium, he had to pick out exactly what he wanted to buy. This was a rare opportunity to rack up on various resources, cultivation techniques, and information that he wouldn't normally be able to get in touch with. This was one benefit of appearing as himself: he did not need to pretend to be all-knowing and powerful. Of course, the Emporium could no doubt guess that Lex's background was not simple. But what did it matter if they guessed or not? Lex was still in the Golden Core realm. It was understandable for him to have gaps in his knowledge. If he could supplement his knowledge with that of the Emporium's, not only would he be better off, it would be a lot easier for him to maneuver in the future. Lex could not help but sigh. Things were just too chaotic. He was already in a time crunch to discover the anomaly in the crystal realm before his deployment information from the Henali came. Now, he also had to prioritize his own cultivation using the elixir since it would soon disappear. At the same time he had to maximize his profits from it as well. Not to mention that Lex had numerous employees who were stronger than him. They were currently suppressed because of the subtle influence the Inn played in ensuring they work honestly, not to mention those that saw his outburst when he used the butter knife at its full strength. But there was Zagan, a monster currently still undergoing tribulations. Lex had to figure out how to keep him in line. On top of all that, there was now apparently a group of people who knew exactly how to locate system users. Would they be able to detect him as well? He had no idea, but he had to check up on it sooner rather than later. Lex didn't have an issue with the problem, but the fact that too many problems were coming all at once. How was one man supposed to do everything at the same time? Oh yes, there was also a wedding he had to plan. He should see if he could get anything from the Emporium to improve the wedding. Poor Innkeeper, he was completely swamped. Mary, keep an eye on them and tell me if anything significant happens. I have to deal with this first. Although it sounded a lot like Lex was lamenting, in truth he was pretty calm. He complained that he had to do everything himself, but he knew that he had been raising some pretty loyal followers. Previously he was really worried since all his workers seemed to have an extremely mellow and amicable temperament. How would they deal with it if a situation escalated and he wasn't there? but now, there was finally one fellow who was a bad seed. How would he be able to take it if one of his co-workers was challenged to a deathmatch? Not too well, if Lex had to guess. Suddenly, Lex's tense muscles relaxed. Yes, he had to remember that the innkeeper was never alone. He had the entire inn backing him up. "Do you have some tea?" Lex asked Powell as he perused the list. "This may take a while." The 3 rhino centaurs that were currently trying to sell the location for the system users were not the only ones who had arrived at the inn from their organization. Their organization was exceedingly mysterious, and each member could only join the organization by being invited. Each member was extremely powerful, for snatching a system from a system wielder was not easy at all. Systems gave their users unfair advantages, which made them extremely difficult to kill, which is why most members operated in groups. Of course, their organization also had a loose organizational system, and there was nothing really stopping one member from attacking another to steal their system, so they had to be careful who they partnered with. At least, that's what it was like as basic members of the organization, which is what these 3 were. They had been recruited due to their strengths, and had formed a team because they felt that it was easier to trust one from their own race. As basic members of the organizations, they did not have many perks, but they were eligible to get a special device which could detect systems in a close proximity. There were numerous limitations on the machine, and theirs was the most basic version of the machine too, so it was extremely lucky that they were able to discover Garland back on Myriad. "I think you should take a look at." But Garland did not have a simple background even on Nibiru, so they hired a helper using the chat room. Of course, since the helper was stronger than them, they also signed a contract through the chat room that the helper could not divulge any information about them, and could not try to harm them in any way. The contract was upheld by the chat room, and if anyone tried to break it there was a severe punishment, so it was safe to use. Their helper protected them from external interference, while the 3 of them ganged up on Garland. Once it became apparent that he was about to lose, Garland tried to use the golden key to escape, but was ultimately killed before he could use it. Later on, when they had retried the system and escaped pursuit, they gave all of Garland's belongings excluding the system to their helper. It could not be helped, it was a part of his contract that all loot would be turned over to him. When he was inspecting the key, he accidentally broke it and brought them all to the Midnight Inn. Initially, they took things cautiously and made sure to understand their new environment. But when their helper discovered John was a system user, he did not hesitate to challenge him to a deathmatch. There was no mention of systems, and John did not know his motives, but naturally he was provoked into accepting, so currently a deathmatch was underway. It was just these 3 who were more cautious and did not dare to randomly pick a fight with the innkeeper. It wasn't as if they had heard of his reputation before. It was just a part of their personalities to not provoke death. Unfortunately, at least among the workers at the inn, it was already common knowledge that these 3 had arrived with the same beast which had challenged John to a deathmatch in the murder grounds. The 3 were busy focusing on their chat interface, completely oblivious to their surroundings, when one of them suddenly felt something on his shoulders. He looked up, and was stunned to find a thin, delicate-looking man standing calmly on his shoulders. He was wearing a smart 3-piece suit which only amplified his aura, adding an air of power to the arrogance he radiated. The other 2 rhinocentaurs quickly noticed something was wrong, and looked up to find a human looking down on them. "Welcome to the Midnight Inn," he said in an exceptionally cold voice. "I hope you find it to your liking." The man's polite words did nothing to diminish their sudden anger, and one of them yelled fiercely as he punched the man, trying to push him away. But the man very simply took a step forward, and moved from one of the rhinocentaur's shoulder to another's head. "I heard that one of your friends challenged John to a fight to the death." He squatted down, but such an action only brought greater attention to the fact that he was looking down on them. "Here at the Midnight Inn, we take great pride in our hospitality. Since one of your friends is in a fight to the death, how can we bear to leave you feeling lonely? How about it? Are any of you interested in fighting with me to the death?" Although the human did not seem powerful, his words brought the 3 rhinocentaurs great stress. Was the inn making a move against them? They immediately tried to exit the inn, but found that they could not. What's the rush? Why leave so soon? I especially took my time to go to the security room and have them block you from teleporting away before I approached you. How can I allow you to leave without tasting our hospitality? The three rhinoceros suddenly noticed that, at some point, they had been encircled by a large number of suited humans. Some of them were radiating an especially strong aura, though most of them were not so intimidating. But their numbers alone was something to worry the rhinocentaurs. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Luther, and I have recently added a new occupation to my resume. Alongside my main job, I have also become in charge of fertilizer procurement. Allow me to show you how I fulfill this role. Chapter 6:19 Blood of Covenant. Under a familiar night sky was a battlefield filled with rubble which once used to belong to some ancient ruins, which were no doubt once a glorious civilization. The battlefield seemed to stretch into forever, and perhaps if the combatants made it far enough, they would once again see some standing ruins. But sightseeing was not really on the agenda for the two combatants, locked in a fight to the death. John's repertoire consisted of exceedingly lethal and deadly attacks, but the greatest flaw of those attacks was that they were more geared towards assassination than combat. They were designed to be swift, piercing, and devastating. But for all the might that they packed, to use each one certain conditions needed to be met. Matching those conditions in the midst of active combat was difficult, to say the least. But any assassin worth his salt would also know that in case of a failed assassination, he might have to face active combat and perhaps even a siege, so their skills were more than sufficient even in combat, if not quite as good as their assassination. The issue John was facing, however, was that the massive centipede-like creature he was facing was ridiculously strong. Even in optimal conditions, John might not be able to assassinate him, let alone now that the target was aware of his intentions. John, who was perfectly hidden within the fold of space within a shadow, discovered that much like the mystery trial, any assassination plan his system helped him conjure would always be perfectly countered by this enemy. It was only when he attempted his own methods that he got even a hint of a positive result, despite the system's approach being more rounded than his own. He did not know who this fellow was, nor why he had gone crazy in provoking him, but John was not about to take things lightly. Even if direct assassination methods spawned by the system were not working, he had other methods he could use. John's eye turned black and he once again got ready for one of their brief, but deadly clashes. Strange black lines began creeping up on his skin, line tendrils of an unspeakable evil, encroaching upon his body from an unknown abyss. While John readied his next attack, the centipede-like creature stood silent and confident in the murder grounds. As a member of the System Hunter organization, his personal strength had been judged to be enough to hunt the average system wielder even if he was alone. It would not be so easy to take him down. Moreover, while the creature knew its opponent had a system, John did not know that his greatest secret had already been revealed to the opponent to a small degree. The advantage that knowledge presented could either be small or great. But the only thing that was certain was that the outcome of this battle could not yet be determined based on the advantages any one party had over the other. I think you should take a look at. The entire security team surrounded the three rhinoceros, watching as Luther aggravated them. Truthfully, their actions were breaking the rules. The three guests had not done anything illegal, and so it was not appropriate to punish them by blocking their exit from the inn. Technically speaking, even their challenge to the murder grounds had been legal. As if blocking their exit was not bad enough, Luther even came with the intention of attacking them. Considering all of this was against the rules, all the workers felt quite uncomfortable doing it. But Luther's plan had personally been approved by Gerard, the head of security. Moreover, the greatest reason Luther and everyone else were so agitated was that their memory of what had happened to their fellow workers was extremely fresh. In fact, besides the security team, Harry himself was also present in the encirclement. Although strictly speaking he was not a combatant, and he was not one of the workers that the inn summoned itself, his attachment to the Midnight Inn was one of the greatest. As someone who had to rely only on his own skills and connections to live, being accepted by everyone and having a home like the Midnight Inn was beyond a dream. Even before everything was completely ruined on Earth, he was a lot more likely to end up homeless and broke than anything else. So, bound by the feelings of home, of friendship, of loyalty, he stood at the forefront. Even if he was not the one who had been challenged to the death match, he would not stand aside and watch as one of his own was threatened. Recently, a silent sentiment had been spreading amongst all the workers of the inn. Most of them had no memories before the inn, and knew no life other than the inn. Even after interacting with countless guests and learning about the outside world, they did not feel as if they were missing out. In fact, they felt even closer to their co-workers and the inn. But if there was one thing that the guests had that they often did not, which made them somewhat envious, was a surname. At some point, as a joke, a certain guest had joked that they were all a part of the Midnight family. But like an ember falling on a pile of dry leaves, the joke did not disappear. Instead, it grew into a small fire, which was slowly and steadily turning into a roaring flame. In fact, unbeknownst to Lex, after he recovered from his near-fatal injuries, Harry had given up his original surname of Styles and taken on the surname Midnight. So now, facing these three conspirators, it was not Harry Styles standing ready for war. It was Harry Midnight, the proud and powerful glamour sorcerer of the inn. Beside him stood not his co-workers and neighbors, but his chosen family. After all, the blood of the covenant was thicker than the water of the womb. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 620 Houses of Midnight. Harry may have been the first to take up the name, but he was certainly not the last. When it occurred to the staff that they could take on the name Midnight, fervor and zeal spread through the masses. No longer would they only have one name. No longer would they have no origin. They would be one family. But just as quickly as the excitement spread, so too did fear and hesitation. Unlike Harry, who was acknowledged by all, and had a special relationship with the innkeeper, most others felt unworthy of the name. On one hand, they yearned for the name and all it entailed, but on the other hand, because of the immense worship they felt for the name and its prestige, they felt unworthy to adopt it. They dare not admit to anyone the struggle they felt, yet they could not come up with an answer to their internal struggle. Sensing the deep demoralization spreading through his brothers and sisters, Z took it upon himself to come up with a solution. After all, the more important members of the inn were all swamped with tasks delegated by the innkeeper. How would they have time to notice such details, especially when everyone kept them hidden so deeply in their hearts? Only one as attentive as him would pick up on such details. Even though he looked younger than most of the inn's workers, since most of them called him Big Brother, he had to act as one. He did not make a big show of things, nor did he make an announcement. He directly called some of the others and shared the situation, as well as his plan. None of them hesitated to support him, and Luther especially praised for his initiative. It was thus that the houses under the banner of Midnight were formed. Only the most prominent and specially accomplished of the inn's workers would take on the name Midnight. For the rest, they would join one of the lesser houses. Z selected for himself a surname, and took it upon himself to be the founder of the Starcloak House. The Starcloak House would be for the masses, and would be vast like the infinite starlit night sky. It would be the place that perfectly captured the magic and wonder of midnight, and the place where most of the inn's workers would find themselves. Gerard, as the head of security, founded the House of Umberguard. As the guardians and protectors of the Midnight Inn, they perfectly encapsulated the meaning of the name Umberguard. The shadow, or darkness, of Umber perfectly represented midnight, and as the first line of defense and guardians, they themselves were the guard in the name. The entire security team joined Umberguard, bringing them closer than ever to one another, and turning their secret insecurities into pride instead. Delma founded the House Nixhart. Her intention was to establish a house full of the romantics in the Midnight Inn, but more and more the house was taking shape to ensure the will of the inn, to ensure that the innkeeper's heart's desires were met. Spies, secret agents, and intelligence operatives filled this house. Finally, Luther himself created a house called Nightshade. Its purpose was simple: to poison and kill anyone who would threaten the inn. Unlike the Umberguard, who would protect, the Nightshade would proactively attack. Members of all four houses encircled the three rhino centaurs and watched in silence as Luther, for the first time, performed the duty of his house. I think you should take a look at. I have studied the rules of your inn, one of them roared, still trying his best to avoid a deteriorating situation. In fact, it only appeared that was his intention. He was delaying so that his partners could quickly sell the information in exchange for a teleportation reward, as well as some points that could be used within the chat room. Unfortunately for them, the level of teleportation that the chat room awarded that could forcefully work in the Midnight Inn was far beyond anything they could afford. Yes, unfortunately, you have not. But don't you worry, I won't kill you yet. After I capture you, you can be the perfect excuse to finally get permission from the Innkeeper to build the prison I've always wanted. Not to mention, how can I question you for your motives if I let you die so easily? Without waiting for a response, Luther attacked. Red flames engulfed him, immediately searing the head of the rhino centaur he was standing on. The rhino centaur screamed in pain and convulsed, but by then Luther was already gone. Displaying an absolutely abnormal speed, he had dashed from the first centaur's head to the legs of another. He controlled his red flames and wrapped them around the legs of another, attempting to completely immobilize it, but how could three members of the System Hunter organization have such little combat experience? Before his flames could burn the centaur's legs, it employed a technique to increase its fire resistance as it charged towards Luther. From the side, the third centaur coordinated with it to simultaneously attack Luther. They had teamwork, skill, and plenty of experience working for them. They were prepared to fight against those even with the cheats of a system, let alone a single normal human. But Luther was not at all a normal human, and who was to say the cheats a system user had were more than that granted to him by his bloodline? The flames he used were called Hellflame, and were so strong they would harm both the user and the enemy. But the reason Luther appeared fine was because he could use his bloodline to move the lethal damage being accumulated from the raging hellflame constantly burning him alive. In the case where he was accumulating enough damage to kill himself every second, what was accumulating just a little more? Completely ignoring the attacks landing on his body, Luther reached forward and grabbed the centaur's face with his hand and brought it close to himself. Fire resistance did not mean fire immunity. So while the centaur tried to ignore the pain of its face being burnt, and attempted to free itself from Luther's grasp, it missed the look of pure malice in his eyes. How dare they threaten an employee of the inn? Luther would ensure they lived to regret it.